Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 242. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, talking about the war in Ukraine. This has been pretty much the coverage all week. Now, I do want to mention that next week I do plan to do some shows to catch up what's happening on Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan. There's a few other things that are really deserve to be covered. However, there's so much coverage about Ukraine that I do think there's enough to break down here to do another whole show on it. So that is going to be today's show again. Also, some of you might have noticed that this week there hasn't been a news roundup at the Institute, and that the news crawler on the YouTube video version of the show has been a little bit behind, and that is just due to the fact that we are doing a little bit something different at the Institute right now. Myself and Will Porter are now the news team there, and we're writing up stories for the news section. And so next week I will get back to doing the roundup and have the news crawler more up to date and everything like that. But just in the process of trying to do that, this is like the first week that me and Will are doing it, and of course it's the most intense week of war news coverage in a long period of time. And so we've prioritized getting stories right about what's happening on the ground in Ukraine over getting out more content, me putting out the news roundup and doing things like that. Also, just haven't had enough time to really dedicate what I need to be able to break down this Ukraine situation in the way I want to for everyone, and to be able to have enough like knowledge and time to prep a show on Yemen, because there's just so much to catch up on there as well, that that war is still developing. And I, in a way, hate that I have spent so much time on Ukraine when all the developments in Yemen are so important too. But I will get back to that next week, everyone. But keep your eye on the Institute, and then I have also been writing for antiwar.com, and you can find me on the news section, and sometimes reprint it from the Libertarian Institute articles with Will Porter. I've been doing a lot of different podcast appearances lately. I can't keep up on all the different names of the show. Blackbird with James Jameson was absolutely great. Misty on Twitter, I don't know her last name, but she had me on both of her shows. She's a big Assange activist. The shows were absolutely great. I really enjoyed doing those. And then a few others. Sorry for the ones that I forget. Oh, Keith Knight, my Libertarian Institute colleague. I was on his show, Don't Tread on Anyone, to talk about what's happening in Ukraine. That's pretty much been the exclusive of what everyone's talking about. So if you want to check out more content, I know I haven't gotten out as many bonus episodes the past couple of weeks as I was doing before, but I've definitely been on a lot of shows and talking about this, and different details and from different angles. Like me and Keith really focus like going back to 2014 more than the current stuff. All right. So, yeah, so just check out the Libertarian Institute. Me and Will are got a news section now. I think the news articles that we're writing up there are really great. Some of them are more extensive, like, really getting into what's happening on the ground, like we'll do on today's show with the battle at the nuclear power plant, or a little bit shorter, maybe just a quick, hitter story about like this is a brief breakdown of what's happening in this particular situation. So be sure to check that out. And then, the shows at the Institute hosted there, because I'm the news editor. Will Porter is now our assistant news editor. He's absolutely fantastic, and is really helping to bring this whole thing to life. Has been working absolutely tirelessly this past week to bring y'all news on this at the Institute. So really appreciate what Will is doing. And then if you want to follow, Twitter is the best place to follow me at Kyle Anzalone _. The show Twitter page is probably more active than the Facebook one. Connor Freeman mainly runs that. He's the co-host of the show at Con_interest. And then you could also find the show on Facebook. I am sure to post all the episodes, and almost everything that I write ends up on that Facebook page. Although we just get slammed on the Facebook algorithm terrorism, so it's really not worth it for me to spend my time there. All right, and then donate. Of course, the fund drive's going on right now at antiwar.com. So, what better time to donate to antiwar.com? This is hosted at the Libertarian Institute. So, if you would like to donate there, you certainly could do that as well. And then, if you prefer, for whatever reason, to donate personally, there is a Patreon, Subscribestar, and crypto information all in the show notes page. And you can support the show by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. All right, let's get into the show. I'm sorry about all those notes, but I do feel like there's a lot, going on at the Institute that I do want to tell you guys about. And I feel like maybe I would have dropped it in little bits throughout the week, but it's just been so busy that I've been trying to focus more exclusively on what's happening. So, all right, let's get into Ukraine, the important stuff going on now. What's going on with my anti-war career here? So Kiev, what's happening in Kiev? That's the capital city of Ukraine. Russian forces continue to move south along the Dnieper River towards it. On both sides of the river, as far as I could tell. It seems they've advanced. Now, there are a lot of Western media reports saying that the city is surrounded. That doesn't seem correct to me at this point. There are reports that there's a humanitarian corridor, and either, depending on how you're counting it, the second or third round of talks between Russia and Ukraine apparently netted a ceasefire around different humanitarian corridors for people to leave cities. We've seen this in the past in the Middle East, these kinds of agreements, and while they often do break down because somebody starts shelling in the area, or so I'm not saying this is happening yet in Ukraine, but in Syria, sometimes the militants would try to sabotage the peace deals by shooting sniper fire at the people trying to flee, right? And then that would cause the ceasefire thing to fall apart. And so nothing like that yet in Ukraine, but those are kind of how these agreements tend to fall apart, at least where we've seen them in other places. But as far as I know, people are, if they would like to, are able to leave Ukraine, as long as they are not a fighting aged male. And so I think official decree from the Ukrainian government is if you're between 18 and 60, you're not allowed to leave Ukraine. You're going to be drafted into the general mobilization, handed a gun, and expected to go fight the Russians. I'm not sure, what kind of exemptions you could seek to find. I'm sure they'd have different medical exemptions and things like that. I'm not sure if they have conscientious exemptions or options to fight, not fight, but maybe be a medic, be a cook. These things are needed in war efforts, and maybe they are offering these options. I've read several reports, and it does seem, at least there are, examples of people who are trying to leave and who would prefer to leave Ukraine and are instead being, forced into the military. And so, that's obviously condemnable by the Ukrainian government, no matter how desperate they may seem. It's not right for Zelensky to grab 18-year-old Ukrainian men and put them in between himself and the Russians. That's just despicable. Now, I have seen reports, and certainly, people have said this as if it was truth, and I'm not trying to condemn anybody. I don't know that they have gone after young boys as young as 14 years old. Now, you know what I mean? If you're a 16-year-old and somebody's invading your country, you might want to go fight. So I don't know exactly how all those dynamics work, but drafting definitely somebody as young as 14-year-old, and if that's happening, it is absolutely disturbing, right? So that's those are some of the reports on people leaving. I forget where the last UN numbers were. I saw 500,000 and then 600. So I think they're at between 600,000 and a million people have now either fled Ukraine or fled their homes. So it's not exactly clear to me if they're counting refugees as just people who have crossed into Poland, or people say from Kiev who have moved into cities in western Ukraine, which is in a lot of ways probably not all that much better. I mean, I guess if you could go stay with a relative like in California, right? If you live in New York, that's one thing, versus if you have to like flee to Canada, probably there's probably some more significant differences there. Or Mexico maybe is a better example, just different language and things like that. But all the same, being displaced is terrible, right? Whether you're in or out of your country. So it's not exactly clear to me there. Also, all the reports on the number of people fleeing that I'm seeing are talking about the people who are fleeing the Russian invasion, which I'm guessing is most. However, there is some pretty significant fighting in the Donbass region, and so it's very possible there are people, and there are plans. And I think at one point I saw reports that 60 to 70,000 people had left the Donbass region of Ukraine, and maybe even people who are now in Russian-held territory are fleeing to Russia if they feel more loyalties or more comfort for whatever reason with that side. And unknown, I guess is why I'm saying the number, but I'm assuming that there are tens of thousands or so that have moved into Russia. The U.S. is telling its citizens not to flee Ukraine into Russia. So I think that's worth noting. All right, back to Kiev. There was the bombing of the TV tower. I saw 5 to 6 civilians killed in this, potentially a child, but unclear exactly how many. But I do believe that there are some casualties from this attack. I believe the Russians tried to justify this by saying that it was broadcasting Russian military information, where their location units are, where the citizens should go to get guns to shoot at the Russians, where you go to mobilize, how to make home explosives and things like that. And so these are the kinds of things that happen during war, right? Where, Russia wants to shut this down, so they're going to carry out this airstrike. Not that it justifies it, but, this is what happens when you start an aggressive war. And this is why, I'm anti-war. And the thing that needs to happen is for this war to end as quickly as possible, because, these kinds of things are absolute tragedies. It does seem that definitely from the last time I talked about this on the show, which was Tuesday, there has been more attacks in civilian areas. Now, the UN official casualties numbers that I saw that were the highest were actually published on RT, and they put it at 249. I read from the New York Times, I think they put it at 227, and so I'm not sure why the discrepancy. Both were reporting from different branches of the UN. I believe the Russian one, the RT one, was from the Human Rights Council or something like that. So I'm unsure on the civilian casualty numbers. It kind of seems to me, by the amount of fighting that I've seen in Ukraine, it would definitely surprise me if that was inflated. I think that's probably the floor number, is this like 250 number that we're talking about, and that's probably low. Now, what is the discrepancy? I'm not sure. I have seen reports, I believe from the Ukrainian side, that the number is in the thousands, 2,000 plus civilians have been killed. It's possible that, I don't know, maybe from the number of buildings that I've seen and the amount of time it took from, the invasion and the war to pick up these cities to be surrounded versus, when these buildings seem to have been destroyed. If there's people in these buildings, I'm not saying, oh, it's their fault they didn't flee the Russian invasion. That's not the point. My point is more from an analytical standpoint, trying to figure out maybe how many civilians are being killed here. It is possible that the number is only in the low hundreds, 2, 3, up to 500, but it would not surprise me if it is somewhat higher than that, at least, although I'm not sure. My guess is that the Ukrainian stats are inflating it, but that they could be correct. There have been UN monitors in Ukraine for years. The Civil War was going on for 8 years. The U.S. as well had monitors along the Donbass. And so that may actually mean that these numbers are somewhat accurate. That's why I don't want to completely dismiss them, like the numbers in Yemen from the UN that you get, which are always way, way too low. I mean, they finally bumped it up to 400,000 civilians have died from that war. But, I think most people estimate that is probably encroaching, if not on seven figures at this point. And so to just accept the UN number, I think would maybe be unfair to the potential suffering of the Ukrainians here. So I am, trying to remain fairly skeptical of that, but also to point out that Russia hasn't carried out carpet bombings of cities yet. And while there is increasing evidence that civilian targets have been hit, it does make a difference as to when those targets were hit, where if they do without complete warning, the first night of the conflict, then yeah, there's 100 people in every apartment building sleeping there with their children who are killed, versus if the people have fled. Russia's terrorized them. This war is atrocious. But it doesn't necessarily mean that 100 people died every time you see a destroyed building. Again, so much fake content on this. So many times I do reverse searches and find that they're from months ago, if not years ago. And so much of the content seems incorrect. There's a suspicious number of very clean Ukrainian flags on the sides of tanks that look like they've been photoshopped in, and just a good idea to keep your eye on all this stuff very closely. Now, Kiev, the capital, isn't the only place where there's Russian military activity. And again, it doesn't seem like Russia has really started to move on Kiev yet. Unclear why as to that's happening. There's fighting along the Donbass region and along not the rest, but some of the border, or now, encroaching probably hundreds of miles in some points, probably mostly dozens, from Belarus into Ukraine for the Russian soldiers. And then again, coming out of the Donbass a little bit and moving up the Black Sea, or the Sea of Azov coast from Crimea, moving towards the Donbass. And there are some reports that Crimea is now connected with the Donbass, and that is probably pretty significant. It means the city of Mariupol is surrounded. That is one of the places there's the heaviest reports of fighting. It is in Mariupol, where there are reports of fighting around Kiev, I believe, have been on the lower side, where some of these cities, larger cities in the east of Ukraine, there's been reports of more fighting. But I also find it's harder to get content out of these other places, maybe because they're just less populated and things like that. Maybe more people have already left. I'm not really sure, but with it harder to get out, it's just harder to guess on what's exactly happening there. There are now a few Ukrainian cities that are under Russian control, and I think, admitted by the town's leadership, that Russia has taken over different areas. There was a strike on a ministry building in one of these cities that is reported to have killed Sits. And I saw some video. Certainly looks like it was residential, civilian, kind of normal day-to-day stuff going on, cars driving around the road at the time of the Russian strike. So it could have killed that many. I did see somebody, I think, that said that up to 20 people were either killed in that strike or a strike on an apartment building in the same city. And so the civilian deaths are definitely starting to build up. There's definitely, again, that UN number of 250, 247 or whatever, I do think it is probably a floor from the amounts of airstrikes I've seen and the amount of fighting. Then there's a lot of questions about Odessa. Will the Russian forces take Odessa? If they leave the Crimean Peninsula, in that case, I guess they would head west, and maybe, but it I guess is kind of unclear as to what the Russian strategy is at this point. Now, that's the next point I want to make. This isn't trying to push any kind of Russian propaganda or anything like that, but a lot of people are assuming that this is going poorly for Russia or something like that, and it certainly isn't a route, right? the Ukrainian military fought, at least at some places. The civilians are fighting, at least in some places. Maybe the most heroic thing going on in all of this is there's a lot of civilians standing in front of tanks, standing in front of Russian troops, and just saying like, "Turn around, go home." And at least from what I have seen, there hasn't been any of these instances where the Russian troops were confronted with civilians and the civilians ended up dead in you know non-violent actions against the Russians. Not that a civilian throwing a Molotov cocktail from the door of their house or something makes it any less of a murder if a Russian troop opens up fire on them. But there definitely is some kind of cruelty if you're just running over people with tanks who are standing in front of you versus somebody who is trying to kill you, even if you're an invader. So there's a lot of I've seen at least probably 10 examples of this where I feel relatively confident in the video and things like that. People standing in front of these tanks, and it's pretty brave, heroic stuff going on when you're doing that kind of thing. So the Russians have definitely met armed and unarmed resistance within their invasion of Ukraine. A lot of, I think, the U.S. commentators are assuming that they expected Russia to have this wrapped up, and there were reports pretty early on that there was fighting close to the Independence Square in Kiev, and within the first week it certainly wasn't impossible. I get that first weekend where you did hear reports of fighting within close to Independence Square. Like, who knows how long this government is going to hold up, the military is going to hold up, especially in the wake of a Russian invasion. So I'm sure it was possible for all that to go awry very quickly, but it hasn't. That being said, I'm not convinced, I guess, yet that was the Russian plan, or at least primary objective. The way we think this is going to go in reality is that it's going to take X number of weeks. That it might be, they assess that it's going to take a month to capture Kiev or something like that. It's unclear, I guess. It seemed that Russia didn't rush all their forces into Ukraine, that they now have built up quite a significant number of forces around parts of the city of Kiev. Again, they haven't encircled the whole city and other areas of Ukraine, but I'm not sure even if it is a whole 175,000 troops that they've brought in at this point. And, I've heard they've doubled it from like 30 to 60 or 75,000 Russian troops now in Ukraine. So, troop deaths. Let's mention this. I saw a U.S. estimate saying that they say 1.5 thousand, so 1,500 soldiers on each side of this conflict has died. That seems like an absolutely possible number. The assumption bias, that you think that the U.S. has is that they would maybe inflate Russian numbers and, downplay the Ukrainian numbers, where, Russia would do the opposite. Russia says 5,000 or 500 of their soldiers have died. And I think Ukraine says 5,200 or so Russian soldiers have been killed. The U.S. number, actually, from just, again, what footage you could see, the amount of fighting, how long this has lasted, and things like that, seems possible. The Ukrainian number definitely seems on the high side. The Russian number also seems possible. And something that we have to, factor in here, too, is just how advanced is the Russian medical, field medicine. How fast can they get people from the battlefield front either to Belarus or to Russia to get like advanced trauma care? This is a big difference in why the U.S. casualty, the number of U.S. soldiers who have actually died in war during the Middle East versus, say, Vietnam, is just that the medical care on the battlefield has improved so much that people die after losing live after losing multiple multiple limbs on the battlefield, and this happens at a far greater rate. And so, how many of Russia's troops can they save this way? How many Ukrainian troops can they save this way? And then the same thing when we're looking at the civilian numbers as well, that they could be lower in Ukraine than say Yemen, because Ukraine, up until fairly recently, like, I don't know exactly how developed their hospital system is, but if you look at Yemen's, that has been devastated over the past 7 years of war, somebody who gets injured by shrapnel in a bombing, I would imagine, is far more likely to die in Yemen versus Ukraine, where at least I've only seen one report of a hospital being hit, and it was reported to have been hit by Russian artillery, and I believe a child died. It was a child's cancer center or something like that. Absolutely horrific story, but can't confirm that. It's just, that is the report. And even, look, and this is one of those situations too, where if a children's hospital is hit, it may not be intentional on either side to hit that children's hospital, but at the end of the day, it is the Russian invasion that is causing it, no matter how else you want to look at it. So I think that's all the updates I have on the fighting and stuff like that, except for the nuclear fighting breaking out around a nuclear facility in Ukraine. This is Europe's largest nuclear facility. It's about 200 kilometers from the line of control in the Donbass. This is a nuclear facility that in 2014 came under attack by the right-wing Right Sector group in Ukraine. 40 men tried to take it, and they were neutralized. I believe actually that doesn't mean killed. I think I saw another report that said they were disarmed, but I think the Ukrainian government said neutralized. Anyways, yeah, the Russian tanks rolled in. I wasn't sure what I was looking at on the live stream when I initially saw it, but then I saw some reports of this, and I rolled back and watched the footage, and sure enough, you can see some tanks rolling in, and fighting breaks out. Now, if you go on Google Maps, you could kind of see a map of this place, and that the nuclear reactors are actually kind of out on like a land barge type thing jetting out into the body of water there. And then, in the mainland area, this is there's like office buildings, training centers, and one of the training centers or an administrative building, depending on, or that could be the same thing. It's just depending on which report you read, that's what they say. And that was hit, caught fire. That fire has been out. The IAEA, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the UN's nuclear watchdog, issued a statement saying that there was no increase in the radiation levels at the plant. So good news is, seems fighting at that plant subsided today. Not necessarily good news that Russia has control, but that somebody is firmly controlling. We're not talking about, a nuclear meltdown. The Ukrainian officials were warning this could be larger than 10 Chernobyls, and, that could have been the case. Now, one thing that people were saying is Russia was intentionally trying to blow this up. This seems kind of stupid to me, since Russia sent ground forces and didn't hit it with a missile. But at the same time, I'm sure that there was, a possibility whenever you fight around a nuclear reactor that some kind of errant shell finds its way into some place it shouldn't be and could potentially cause even a small problem. A small nuclear problem is a very long-lasting and a very serious problem, even if it's not, like a full-on nuclear meltdown. If maybe the Russian forces didn't bring that kind of capability that it could have penetrated anything that could cause a meltdown, at the very least, even making it harder to operate one of these nuclear facilities is extremely dangerous and extremely risky. I'm sure any kind of change in power like this at these kinds of facilities is very, very difficult to manage. So I guess the maybe breathe a sigh of relief. It seems again that, this is in somebody's control, and that hopefully, it stays that way, unfortunately. And if it has to go back, it could be done peacefully, because it's certainly uncomfortable to watch a nuclear facility come under attack. That being said, of course, absolutely terrible what's going on here in Ukraine when, again, there's fighting going on around these nuclear facilities. Although it is worth mentioning again that this isn't that far from the line of control in Ukraine, and there has been an 8-year civil war going on there. And, activist groups have warned during that time that this is a potential site where something really terrible could happen. All right. Let's see. Foreign fighters coming into Ukraine. Me and Will write about this at the Libertarian Institute. Foreign fighters arrive in Ukraine to repel Russian invasion. At least 16,000 foreign nationals have volunteered to join an international legion created to resist Russia's invasion of Ukraine, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He said that the first group of the fighters are starting to arrive in Ukraine, although didn't identify the nationality of those fighters. It seems that some fighters are more, or some countries are more willing to send fighters. Sweden is very open about this, and they believe that they have 400 men that are willing to go and join up the Ukrainian army. The Czechs have waived, the Czech Republic has waived a law that would ban such activity, but they are going to allow it, and 300 Czechs are reported to be ready to go to fight for Ukraine in Ukraine. The U.S., tried to downplay this. Canada, I think, was more encouraging, saying like it could, its citizens could do what it wants. And then the U.K., particularly Liz Truss, said that she would support British nationals heading out for Ukraine, but that is something that people can make their own decision about. Now, Russia has said that if they catch anybody, they're not going to treat them as prisoners of war, but rather as, I guess, criminals. And so, this is disturbing. That isn't how this should work. And obviously, the rules of war are very difficult and depend on the situation and everything like that. But you would hope that Russia would not be foolish enough to let essentially a hostage situation with particularly Western citizens escalate into like a nuclear war, and that if they did capture anyone, they would just, negotiate or something like that to get these people released, rather than it being a festering issue. So, of course, foreign fighters, anytime we think of this, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, where foreign fighters are dangerous, I think, for a couple of reasons. The first being that they don't have the same, maybe, community ties, right? Like, this isn't their homeland. And so, even if you're fighting for your own city, there may be, like, some things that you're just less likely to do, like planting IEDs. Just civilians are going to get killed that way, or destroying structures and things like that. You may, you like your city a lot more, so you don't want to blow it up as much as these random people who don't care about it, and who are, typically, they're there because they're the kind of people that like to fight and kill, right? And so that, that's what you get with foreign fighters who are there, without allegiance, and things like that. In examples like Syria and Afghanistan, certainly the most radical elements end up being the foreign fighters. Again, if you're going to travel thousands of miles and put your life on the line, you probably like it quite a bit, and that's part of the reason why you're doing it. I'm sure, some people are like, oh, I do it for the solidarity and things like that, and maybe some people are kind of sincere about that, but it seems like you probably have some affinity for it if you're taking up a cause that isn't really your own defense. So I think that then you have people coming in that are more extreme, more willing to fight, probably view don't view with as much quality of life of your neighbors that are on a different side of this whole thing, right? And so the foreign fighters could, be like more the extremist jihadist types. Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, foreign fighter jihadist kind of situation is what I'm talking about here. So, and then of course you could also have the opposite happen with there already being extremists in Ukraine, where the Azov battalion, this neo-Nazi battalion, that's the backbone of the Ukrainian National Guard. If you do have Westerners going and fighting and aligning with these guys who are bona fide neo-Nazis, do you risk them, making the Americans or the Westerners more extreme and more likely to use racially motivated violence as these neo-Nazis are? One thing that Will wrote up for us at the Libertarian Institute is titled Ukraine War Zone Flooded with Foreign Weapons as Fighting Rages On. He says the United States and a long list of Western allies have pledged additional arms shipments to bolster Ukraine's war effort, including anti-aircraft missiles and Javelin missiles. Fierce clashes with Russian forces continue in cities from Kiev to Kharkiv. And meanwhile, as local residents report civilian deaths amid damage to infrastructure by the Russian bombardment. And so the U.S. has talked about, I think now, a $10 billion aid package to Ukraine. I'm not sure, what the United States is actually thinking here. It's very obvious that the weapons that the U.S. is giving Ukraine are not meant to win a war against Russia. Now, I guess you could, in the most generous sense, give them, well, the purpose here is that it's going to make this a little bit painful for Putin, and then in a couple weeks he's going to give up. But we're hearing from U.S. officials, I think this was a CBS report, that said they're estimating this war is going to last 10 to 15 years. And so what is the United States doing right now by facilitating these weapon shipments to Ukraine? They are making sure that anybody who is willing to take up arms in Ukraine has a weapon to do that and is going to go out and shoot at Russians. However, it is in no way enough to actually change the outcome of this war, that Russia will win this war. And so this is about killing Russians, right? But you don't really care about the Ukrainians who are also going to be killed. Talked about this on Tuesday's show, I believe, when I covered this thinking that's been outlined by Zbigniew Brzezinski, Hillary Clinton, Antony Blinken, Ro Khanna, Jake Sullivan. Actually, scratch Blinken from that list, I'm not sure. But Jake Sullivan from the current administration has definitely laid this out, that this insurgency could be a loss for Russia, right? And that's the plan here. However, the very dark side of that, of course, is if we're looking at the past example of doing this in Ukraine, there's a great article in the LA Times that lays out from a CIA historian himself saying that, what we did to the Ukrainians there was really terrible, actually. We basically, just used them to kill Russians for us, and it got a lot of them killed too. But the more prominent example, of course, is Afghanistan, which not only created, the Mujahideen and, Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, laid his networks and his roots in Afghanistan. And it's very hard to say and see, a pathway, I guess, where you don't do Afghanistan and then at the same time you have 9/11, right? Like those two things seem correlated on the history of timeline. And, as Brzezinski, I think he said in 1997, they thought they wrecked the Russian or the USSR in Afghanistan, and that was worth it because it just ended up with some pissed off Muslims. But those pissed off Muslims at the very least baited the United States into going and destroying their empire in the Middle East and wasting everything that our entire country, so much life and everything there. Now, let's see. There's a bunch of other weapons going. I've documented this, but those are the general class of weapons. And again, I don't think this is about actually turning the tides of the war, ensuring a Ukrainian victory or anything like that, but rather just about seeing this as a way to kill Russians and weaken Russia and everything like that. You know how cruel this is on all sides, right? Because even if this war is an aggressive war waged by Vladimir Putin, right? That's no doubt what's going on here. Now, there's a lot of nuance to that I've been talking a lot about on the show, but even that being the case, not every Russian here, like it's not just good to kill Russians, even if they're soldiers invading another country, if another solution can be found, right? And so if the US, I think, was putting more pressure on Ukraine to negotiate and talking to Russia about what kind of steps the US could take to alleviate Russia's security concerns, which is why they invaded Ukraine, then they could, probably help Ukraine to negotiate a better deal. However, the United States and all these Western countries are making themselves a party to this war. We're talking about not just the weapons that they're pouring into Ukraine, but also real-time intelligence that they're giving. This kind of stuff, if it was being shared from Russia or China to another country the U.S. was at war with, they would certainly be calling it a problematic, aggressive action by that country. But because, the United States is doing it, they're pretending it's not warfare. But this is, and so are the sanctions. These are warfare, and it is directed at the Russian people. Now, this is the last point I think I really wanted to make on today's show, and it really has nothing to do, I guess, with the situation in Ukraine. That's everything I really have on Ukraine. But it is this sudden desire among the people in the West to punish Russians, right? And again, Putin's a bad guy. There's no defense of Putin, right? And he's waging an aggressive war here. You could talk about the nuances of the Russian actions and why the U.S. really put Russia into a situation where they were going to do something like this, and all that, right? But at the same time, I don't think there's really a way here to defend Putin and be like, this is a great thing that he's doing. He's getting thousands of people killed, and even if it is, just 25, or I guess 3,500 at this point or so, by the kind of minimum official numbers that we seem to be getting, that it's all on Putin, right? Like all that, right? But at the same time, it's not on Russians, and this anti-Russian sentiment. The only thing that in my lifetime it reminds me of is how the country reacted after 9/11, and of course we did absolutely disgusting things in response to 9/11. People are renaming white Russians and Moscow mules. This is freedom fries level stuff. I saw in Germany there was a Russian business that was vandalized. In the U.S., me and Will wrote an article on this. A bunch of states are banning Russian vodka. States are the state of Massachusetts wants to ban people from consuming Russian products at all, like any kind of Russian food or vodka or anything like that. And this is just a level of war hysteria. But when you are on that level, when you do hate Russians that much, when there's this positive obligation in our society for anybody of potential Russian descent, or to have any, potential for Russia, for whatever they are being targeted. And so anyways, I think that's about what I had to say there. It's really bothering me, and I think it could be a potential real issue in the West, the way that we are allowing Russians writ large to be treated and demonized and everything like that. All right, everybody, that's where I will wrap up today's show. I want to apologize for my dog making a little bit of noise here at the end. You probably heard him on some recent interviews as well. My girl has been out of town for a couple weeks, who usually hangs with them while I record, so he has been chilling with me a little bit more than usual, and sometimes likes to get in on the conversation. So my apologies for that, but that will probably only be an issue for maybe one more episode, and after that you won't have to hear him too much. But anyways, thank you all so much for continuing to listen, share the show, and everything like that, and hear me talk about these kind of things. Anyways, more shows next week.